Sending your pet on a hallucinogenic trip might seem like the very definition of irresponsible pet parenting, but hallucinogenic psychogenic medication is actually at the cutting edge in the treatment of PTSD in people and various other emotional disease states. And actually, there's a lot that we may be able to learn from its use in people to make it an appropriate treatment solution for your pet. And I'm joined today by Dr. Kasara Andre to answer all of my questions about this. And as you can imagine, I had quite a few. The beginning question has to be, well, what are psychedelic medicines? Because people probably jump to a number of different, drugs in their mind.
In general, there are quite a few psychedelic molecules, and people will list MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca. There are quite a few others, but then you start to get into indigenous use, so peyote, and there's just a lot, essentially, is what your listeners should kind of be familiar with.
Sure.
Most humans who have experienced psychedelics, if you say psychedelic medicine for animals, the first response that I get is, wow, that's a lot for an animal. Like, that's a lot for an animal to go through. But then I always sort of push back and say, that might be a really human perspective. The things that humans experience on a psychedelic experience might be very human. So there really is an element of veterinary professionals advocating for animals in any emerging medicine field, whether or not we use that medicine for animals. Sometimes it's just the, let's pause for a moment and think about species differences, One Health, translational, and veterinary professionals are just the ones who usually end up doing that. Yeah. But when I say psychedelic medicine for animals, really there's two that stand out as I think potentials: MDMA and psilocybin. And the reasons for that is just basically timeline. Many of these molecules have a long period of action. So a human might undergo an experience with a psychedelic and it be like ayahuasca. 8 hours, 10 hours, like the experience is quite long. Yeah. MDMA and psilocybin, they both have about 6 hours from administration to end. From the human side, sort of what we see humans experience, with the peak being at 3 hours. So Alex, if I say that to you and you think about dealing with an animal, I think probably the length of time is what pops to your mind. Like, can I just ask you, like, what springs to your mind as a practitioner when I say that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a long time to be managing them and to be making sure that they're safe and, well, and yeah, and it's appropriate for them and they don't need any extra assistance. And that's my initial thoughts without any experience of psychedelics from a human or animal point of view.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And it's not something that we have an answer to, but I'll say that that's what, my team and I are really investigating now. What does that need to be? What type of care should there be? Can the animal be by itself and okay, or does it need to have a guide? We see in a lot of the human research and a lot of human work, the guide perspective is really important, but that's a lot of verbal guiding. When we think about the human side, so much of that is built on human interaction, verbal interactions. What does that mean for an animal if we ever find the case where we really need to use psychedelics? And I'll just throw that in there. We can circle back to it later, but many times psychedelics might be an answer, but if we really intentionally work with endocannabinoid system health, healing, family unit medicine, get the human on a good path, many times the animal's just okay. So I want to throw that out there for your listeners I think this is worth exploring because it's a new and emerging modality in our world. And I have a couple of other areas other than direct use in animals that I think veterinary practitioners need to be aware of what's happening on the psychedelic front. But, many times animals are okay if their humans are okay. So this might just be humans, let's really make sure that you can get the help you need and make sure your animal's okay in the midst of it.
Even if it becomes more of a mainstream option, just like everything, it's not necessarily the option that every individual will need. It's another tool that we have available.
Absolutely. And I do think that there probably will be cases. So canine PTSD from a combat scenario, when we have a really point injury, I think that those might be the best scenarios to really consider some of these psychedelic modalities. Animal victims of sexual abuse, that's an area that we don't have really any options from a behavioral perspective. So I do think there are going to be places where this is justified, but as we're exploring this for all of us, pet parents and veterinary practitioners alike, We just need to have our critical thinking hat on.
And with our One Health kind of hat on, if you like, thinking if we can learn from the emerging field from a human treatment point of view, there is, as I understand it, some pretty encouraging work that has been done and has shown to make a big benefit.
Absolutely. Some of the work, particularly in MDMA and human PTSD, is incredible. The numbers of response are just breathtaking. And again, because I have really strong connections in the veteran world, I'm so excited to see that. There are just so many people that I care so deeply about that I see struggle with that. And I think everyone knows what I mean when I say that. To have an answer from the human perspective is just amazing, at least something else to try. And I think you know that I'm really interested in MDMA for veterinary professionals as humans. So as healthcare workers, we're beginning to see a lot of research come out about psychedelic use, cannabis use for medical professionals, for healthcare professionals. So there's just a lot going on in the veterinary professional and our animals and intersection with psychedelic world. And
Dr. Cassar, I'd love maybe just to kind of think about, what the future might hold. I mean, crystal ball gazing, I know a lot of this might be, but maybe with respect to our psychedelic medicines, but also, you spoke to us at length and in great detail about our cannabis and our CBD and the endocannabinoid system. And many people will, I guess, put all of these more alternative forms of therapy in inverted commas into the same bucket. So what does maybe, what would maybe you hope the future looks like, and, over what kind of time frame maybe?
Well, I think the time frame is going to be pretty short.
Okay.
If anyone is following for some reason Colorado politics and regulation, the state of Colorado just decriminalized, so not legalized, but decriminalized most naturally derived psychedelics. And so psilocybin is the one of those. There are several, but that's the one that's gotten the most attention because humans can now grow that at home. So a human can have a grow of psilocybin and it not be criminal. Again, different from legal, but it's not criminal. And Alex, I think you can easily see that my work from the cannabis side is just exactly the same here. And so we're really pushing for harm reduction education first. Just like with cannabis, if a human has a stash of cannabis and your animal gets into it, we have THC intoxication, we have potential for foreign bodies, we have a lot of things that can happen negative from there. The same thing happens with any of the psychedelics. So if someone human is using a psychedelic at home, either legally, illegally, scripted out, like whatever that future looks, the harm reduction that pet parents need is the same. Put your stash up high, put it behind a lock and key. The same thing that you would do for a child is really, really important for animals.
Because I imagine the impact is potentially a lot more severe with an overdose of those compared to with a cannabis overdose, which is generally very, very safe.
Yes, absolutely. Now the animal might be a little bit miserable in a THC overdose, but from the psychedelic side, we see some really powerful molecules there. And importantly, Alex, they're really small. So a lot of these are in pills and tablets, and it's really, really easy for an animal to ingest. And it's just, that's something that we really want to raise awareness of your animals are in your space, they are sharing your same space. What safety mechanisms do you have in place? And then the additional piece for psychedelics, as humans explore the use of psychedelics, often at home, privately led ceremonies, whatever that means, I want them to remember that animals share their space and probably are sharing their emotional state. So again, back to that emotional disease perspective, if a human, and I'm just talking about what's happening here in Colorado, if a human decides to consume, let's say, psilocybin on their own, and guided or not, they're really having a robust emotional experience, no one's told the animal that that's either okay or not okay, or what they should do in the middle of it. So if you have an animal that already has emotional disease, say separation anxiety, or just really having a tough time settling itself, and they're in that same room. Now, we don't know this, but just from a well-being perspective, that raised awareness of your animals can absolutely be worried about you. When your heart rate changes, your breathing changes, you're laughing or you're crying, think about what that means for the animals that share your space. And it's simple, just make sure that they have a place to go, that they have the choice to leave the room if they want to.
Now, cannabis and CBD oil are two other potentially alternative treatment options for your pets with emotional disease with anxiety, but also a huge number of other different diseases that can affect our pets. There are, however, some common pitfalls that you need to avoid. So to make sure that you don't get caught out, you need to check out this video linked on screen now. So tap on that video, and until the next time, I'm veterinarian Dr. Alex. This is Our Pets Health, because they're family.